Hey there, friends. David Lightbringer here, and the boys are fighting again. That's right. Ryan Condal lashes out at George. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. This is not that kind of video. However, you may recall that George made an angry blog post complaining about Maelor and some of the House of the Dragon choices made by Ryan last September it was. Ryan never has really spoken about it or commented about it, and he did make a comment today. So while this video is definitely not meant to be a like, oh, look at this, they're fighting kind of thing, I do think it's interesting to monitor the working relationship, and it's been no secret that there are some issues. Ryan closed his statement saying that he hopes these things can be worked out, which is definitely the sentiment that we all have. So I thought I'd make a quick video. It's not going to be a lot of art, just me talking to you, basically reading his statement, breaking down what we know about the disagreement, and a couple of comments, hoping for the best. So, and on the brighter side, we did get some new news about castings for House of the Dragon Season 3, which is cool, especially because one of those castings is Roddy Roddy the Ruin, fan favorite, leader of the Winter Wolves. He'll be played by Scottish actor Tommy Flanagan, who played Chibs on Sons of Anarchy, and although I did not watch Sons of Anarchy, Grey Area did, and she is all caps excited apparently about this casting. So we'll all be looking forward to that. And also they've been talking up the role of Roddy the Ruin in interviews and stuff recently. So hopefully he'll get a little more screen time than Cregan Stark. Then we have Dan Fogler, who's been cast to play Torrhen Manderly, a knight of House Manderly. And Dan is from the Fantastic Beasts franchise of movies, as well as a movie called A Complete Unknown. And then of course, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, it was announced that James Norton is going to play Ormund Hightower, who's a very important character. And James Norton is probably best known for British TV shows Grantchester and Happy Valley, for which he was nominated for a BAFTA award. And then he's also been in movies like Little Women, Nowhere Special, Joy, and Bob Marley, One Love. So let me know if you want me to make a video about those new characters and the other new characters on Season 3 of House of the Dragon. That is the kind of thing I do, so I'd be happy to do that. If you're interested, let me know in the comments. That will be a spoiler video, of course, but it is fun to take a look at the book versions of the character before they do the adaptation for the show, because in case you haven't heard, there can sometimes be differences between the book and show characters, and sometimes those differences do not cause one love, which brings me to today's topic, Ryan's response to George's blog post from last September. So if you remember, George's post was talking about mostly Maelor Targaryen and him potentially being cut from the show and all the ripple effects that would have. He was talking about the butterflies. And the main thing that I think everyone took away from that post was that there is obviously some sort of breakdown in communication. George said things in the post like, I have no idea what Ryan has planned, and from what I know, that seems to be what Ryan is doing here. So the fact that George, went public with these issues kind of indicates that he didn't feel he could go straight to Ryan, or maybe they tried to talk this out and it didn't work. So obviously there's some kind of communication breakdown. Led Zeppelin, Bob Marley, we're in the 70s today. So Ryan essentially acknowledged that communication breakdown, and I'll go ahead and just read his statement. It's not very long. So this is in an interview with EW about the new season, where he said some other stuff too, obviously, but this is what he said about the George thing. It was disappointing. I will simply say I've been a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire for almost 25 years now, and working on the show has been truly one of the great privileges of not only of my career as a writer, but my life as a fan of science fiction and fantasy. George himself is a monument, a literary icon, in addition to a personal hero of mine, and was heavily influential on me coming up as a writer. And I'll just take a second to second all of those feelings. I'm pretty sure you agree with me and Ryan that George is a genius. We're all here caring about this story because George is a fantastic writer who's created fantastic characters, and he, of course, knows them best. And all of us are sort of treading here with our theories and our adaptations of the shows, trying to do his work justice. I think Ryan has that attitude. It's certainly my attitude, and I share the sentiment of being grateful to sort of be a part of all this. So yeah. And we do know that they did once upon a time have a very good relationship. Of course, George picked Ryan to adapt House of the Dragon even before HBO ever greenlit the show. And they did multiple interviews where they're appearing very buddy-buddy and talking about how closely they're consulting and working with each other and how big a fan Ryan is of the canon and all that stuff. And overall, it just made us feel like that it was a very different relationship than the one George had with Dave and Dan, where they famously did not consult with him after season 3 or 4. And that's basically George's only complaint about Game of Thrones, is that they stopped talking to him. So yeah, it did seem like this was much better at the beginning, but let me continue with Ryan's statement. It's this incomplete history, and it requires a lot of joining of the dots and a lot of invention as you go along the way. I will simply say, I made every effort to include George in the adaptation process. I really did, over years and years. And we really enjoyed a mutually fruitful, I thought, really strong collaboration for a long time. But at some point, as we got deeper down the road, he just became unwilling to acknowledge the practical issues at hand in a reasonable way. So the clickbait headline of this video would have been, House of the Dragon showrunner calls George unreasonable. And although it certainly sucks to hear Ryan say that, he goes on to explain just what he means in the next paragraph. So he says, and I think as a showrunner, I have to keep my practical producer hat on and my creative writer, lover of the material hat on at the same time. At the end of the day, I just have to keep marching not only the writing process forward, but also the practical parts of the process forward for the sake of the crew, the cast, and for HBO, because that's my job. So I can only hope that George and I will rediscover that harmony someday, but that's what I have to say about it. So there you go. Like I said, one love. That is my big take here, is that I hope this can be worked out. It seems like it should be able to, and I mean, just for George's mental well-being and obviously for the show and everyone's career and all that. But let's go back into what Ryan was just saying here. So he's talking about doing an adaptation and how anytime you're doing an adaptation, choices have to be made because they're different formats. Shows and movies obviously don't have inner monologues, so they've got to show character motivations in a different way. Whereas books don't have pictures, so they've got to describe everything. Shows and movies have to be shorter than books, obviously, so sometimes things are consolidated or cut. Describing things with words doesn't really have any limitations. You can create anything you want regardless of cost. Whereas making a movie or show, you've got to actually make it, so you have to work with the limitations of, budget and physics. We don't have magic in the real world, unfortunately. And so Ryan is essentially talking about being caught in between the artistic integrity and the detail of the original story versus the reality of having to try to make the show. And along those lines, we do know that Warner Brothers, HBO, has been having financial issues, not related to House of the Dragon, but, their movie franchise and all kinds of other stuff. And that is the reason why the last 2 episodes were cut from last season. It was originally supposed to have 10 and end with a big battle that we're now going to see at the beginning of season 3. So that is an additional constraint that Ryan is working with and sort of caught in the middle of. And so all that is essentially context. And it does lead us to be sympathetic to Ryan. If you put yourself in his shoes, it's a pretty tough job to adapt such a detailed story to the show, et cetera, et cetera. And Ryan really does seem to be trying to do his best. He does seem to be a genuine fan of the books, just like me, just like you, 25 years. I mean, that's since the beginning. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that all of his choices in cutting or changing things from the books are based on those issues. Some of them are artistic choices, and obviously George can disagree with them if he wants to. It's George's story. He does know it the best. So we also have to give George a lot of leeway as far as, like I said, he knows the story the best. So if he says something is going to be a problem, it probably will be, and we should probably listen to him. Now, that being said, what were George's issues that he raised in the blog post? Well, he pretty much made it all about Maelor Targaryen, one of Helena and Aegon's children. If you recall, he actually pre-hyped the Butterflies blog post in his previous blog post, where he said, I do not look forward to other posts I need to write about everything that's gone wrong with House of the Dragon. So that was already kind of a bad sign, but it led a lot of us to think that maybe he was going to rant about the importance of nettles or talk about the very different characterization of Alicent and Rhaenyra's relationship, which, by the way, are the 2 biggest complaints, I think, in the fandom that I hear about as far as changes from the books. But instead, he mysteriously only talked about Maelor Targaryen. And the funny thing about that is that George famously, for years and years, every time he was asked about the differences between Game of Thrones and the books, he answered by rhetorically asking, how many children does Scarlett O'Hara have? Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind has a different number of children in the book and the movie version. And he's basically saying, hey, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes things are a little different, but the main story is the same, so them's are the breaks. And he continued saying that even after we saw some pretty big changes from the books to Game of Thrones. So we all figured that, okay, he's worked in Hollywood. That's his sort of Zen attitude about adapting his work, and he's realistic about all that. So it's just a little hard to understand how that sort of mindset coexists with George's vociferous objection to the cutting of Maelor Targaryen. It could certainly be that George does have other issues that they've discussed, and he only brought this one Maelor thing up as sort of a proxy argument for the rest of it. Because after all, he did have a previous blog post talking about where dragons live, aka not in the Vale, which seemed to be expressing, disagreement with the change to adapt Nettle's storyline to Rhaena, which is what it seems like they're doing. And of course, I agree with George. I'm a huge fan of Nettles. I made a video about why they should not cut Nettles and how much that will change things. And even though I am still open to the Rhaena storyline now becoming better, and maybe that'll work out, and maybe they'll do some of the coming up from nothing part of Nettle's story by giving it to Hugh. It does seem like they're kind of doing that. But yeah, I'm very sorry to see Nettles gone, so maybe that's what George is really mad about. Who knows? So where does that leave us? Well, again, hoping that they can work it out. After all, they did used to get along, and like I said, George did pick Ryan after the D&D thing kind of went sideways, and George also kind of praised Ryan to the skies. So it really is on George to try to work this out with him. And obviously it's upon Ryan to hear George's complaints and address them. So like I said, I really hope they can just pick up the phone and work this out behind closed scenes where we don't know anything about it. Because after all, George really is too invested in HBO telling his stories to just sort of throw his hands up and say, oh, I don't know what's going on here. We're doing Dunk and Egg, and by the way, Dunk and Egg is being written by Ira Parker, who worked alongside Ryan to write season 1 of House of the Dragon, and Ryan is also consulting on Night of the Seven Kingdoms. So yeah, everyone's committed to this. This is all, everyone's invested in it, and I also think we should consider the fact that when George wrote his Butterflies blog post last year, he was, by his own admission, in a pretty dark place. Specifically, he was dealing with the death of a friend that really impacted him a lot, and then there was just a bunch of other life struggles that were going on at the same time. So it definitely could be that Butterflies post was like, him in a bad mood hitting send on something that maybe he would, should have sat on a little longer. And obviously he did take the post down the next day. Now, he's never addressed the post publicly, so that's kind of left all this hanging, which is probably why Ryan was asked about it and then gave some sort of statement about it. So the last thing I'll say to this is, I don't think we all need to be upset. That's why I didn't give this the clickbait title. I think that this is all the kind of stuff that happens when you're on a creative team. If you've ever been in a band or worked on some sort of big project with other creatives, you fight sometimes, you disagree sometimes. And the main thing is that just everyone has to keep coming back, taking a deep breath, and then trying to continue to work stuff out. So that's it. Just wanted to update everyone on what's going on the communication breakdown, and just, send that message of one love, and let's all just meditate together, and hope this can be improved on. I know that George did like House of the Dragon Season 2. He also did praise it and say a lot of good things about it. And he's super excited for Night of the Seven Kingdoms. So it's definitely not a gloom and doom thing, but there you go. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching all my videos and live streams. I will see you this Sunday at 1 p.m. with yet another live stream about George Martin's wonderful World of Ice and Fire. So I will just cautiously say, let me know what you think in the comments politely. And if you can, send a little positive message of affirmation for one love in the House of the Dragon writing community. And yeah, looking forward to Night of the Seven Kingdoms and eventually House of the Dragon Season 3. So we'll see you again soon.